I ain't gonna be the one looking after the old lady. My husband's sharp words sliced through the air, echoed by my sister-in-law's agreement. Stunned, my brother-in-law and I exchanged glances, frozen in disbelief. Why don't you and Sarah take care of her if you're so concerned? We don't need the burden of an old woman in our home, spat my sister-in-law, her tone dripping with disdain. My husband remained silent, his lack of remorse chilling. How could they discard their own parents so callously, those who had raised and loved them? Anger simmered within me for the first time in my life. But my husband and sister-in-law were blind to a surprising truth about my mother-in-law. Sarah and her family will be taking care of me. Do you think $1 million will cover the car and accessible living accommodations? The revelation stunned us all, my mother-in-law's unexpected declaration hanging heavy in the air. In that moment, my husband and sister-in-law unwittingly sealed their fate, oblivious to the consequences of their words. My name is Sarah. At 40, I found solace in my career as an art teacher, inspired by my parents' artistic legacy. I married Gavin, Emily's son, and we raised 2 beautiful daughters, Autumn and Kate. Life was peaceful until the harsh reality struck. My mother-in-law suffered a stroke. She had always been a kind soul, treating me like her own daughter since childhood. But after Ryder, my father-in-law, passed away, she seemed to lose her spirit. I noticed a change in my mother-in-law's demeanor and made it a point to visit her often with my kids. We'd spend quality time together, even venturing out on outings that seemed to lift her spirits. But one day, I received a frantic call from my children informing me that she had collapsed. Without a second thought, I rushed to the hospital, hastily explaining the situation to my understanding boss at the art school where I taught. Upon arrival, I was met with a scene that left me speechless. My husband, sister-in-law, and kids were engaged in a heated exchange. Dad, Aunt, why would you say something like that? Grandma is your real mom, right? My children's innocent voices pleaded, only to be met with my husband's sharp retort. Shut up. You kids have no business in this. Keep your mouth shut. Witnessing my husband shouting at our children in the hospital, and my sister-in-law glaring at them, I intervened, desperately trying to diffuse the tension. What's going on here? Calm down, I urged, struggling to catch my breath. But instead of cooperation, my husband and sister-in-law unloaded the situation onto me and swiftly left. It wasn't the first time my husband had treated our children and me differently, showing little concern for our well-being. Despite his part-time job, which kept him occupied for 4 days a week, he failed to contribute significantly to our family's finances. Worse yet, he squandered what little he earned on himself, leaving little for our needs. His absence extended beyond his job, with him rarely present at home. Even when he was preoccupied with his phone or lost in a comic book, ignoring my pleas for help with household chores and quality time with our kids. It was a stark contrast to the generosity we had experienced from my parents-in-law's friends when we first started our family. I never imagined our life would take this turn. It leads me to question if I should have given more thought to my choice of life partner. As for my sister-in-law, she mirrors my husband's indifference towards me, our children, and even our mother-in-law. It's not just with her, she treated my father-in-law the same when he was alive. Her sole interest seems to be her job as a hostess where she entertains young men. Consequently, she neglects household chores and caring for our shared home. Whenever our mother-in-law attempts to communicate with her, she snaps back with disdain, prioritizing her own time and needs. The saying, "the same parents' hearts are unknown to their children," couldn't ring truer in this situation, or rather, it's even worse. Witnessing such atrocious behavior from my husband and sister-in-law left me speechless. Yet amidst this turmoil, my main concern remained with my mother-in-law, who was undergoing surgery. Prayers for her well-being filled my thoughts as I navigated through the chaos. Amidst it all, a familiar face arrived at the hospital, someone I had called on our way there. "Sister-in-law, how is Mom doing?" Shane, my husband's younger brother, stood before me, accompanied by his wife Maya and their twin daughters who were the same age as our children. Panting and drenched in sweat, they had rushed to be with us. Shane had found success as a novelist, his hobby-turned-career flourishing after one of his novels became a hit online during his university days. He married Mia 2 years after graduating and welcomed twin daughters. Now, they lived peacefully in the city, away from the family home. "She's still in surgery. It's uncertain what will happen," I informed them, grateful for their presence amidst the uncertainty. I wished I could offer words of reassurance, but faced with such uncertainty, my attempts felt feeble. However, the younger brother-in-law appeared slightly relieved, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from his older siblings. Unlike my husband and sister-in-law, he genuinely cared for us and our mother-in-law. Concerned about her aging and widowhood, he remained in close contact, frequently bringing his family back to their parents' house to check on her. These visits served as a source of comfort and strength for our mother-in-law. My in-laws, inherently kind souls, always avoided unnecessary conflict with my husband, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law since childhood. Sadly, this may have inadvertently contributed to my husband and sister-in-law's current demeanor. Yet amidst the discord, my brother-in-law emerged as a beacon of decency. Hours later, the surgery concluded and the doctor ushered us into a small room. "We've done all we could. She'll survive, but there will be lingering effects. She'll require round-the-clock care," the doctor disclosed, leaving us breathless. The prospect of my mother-in-law's recovery filled me with hope. Neglecting her care would mean enduring more interactions with my husband and sister-in-law than I cared for. Despite our reservations, my brother-in-law and I resolved to involve them. After thorough explanation and persuasion, they reluctantly agreed. Gathering at my in-laws' house, we convened a meeting while our mother-in-law remained hospitalized. Both my husband and sister-in-law attended, but their demeanor quickly soared as complaints poured forth. They adamantly declared their disinterest in caring for our mother-in-law. "I've taken care of that old hag." "Same here." Those appalling words from my husband left both my brother-in-law's family and me frozen. "Brother, sister, don't joke at a time like this. If you won't look after her, what's going to happen to Mom? Why should we care? You and Sarah can take care of her," my sister-in-law dismissively replied, fiddling with her beautifully manicured nails. My husband, too, nodded with a bored expression etched on his face. "Then we should consider placing mother-in-law in a nursing home." "What nonsense. You're suggesting we use our money for that old woman? A nursing home? Are you kidding? That's just throwing money down the drain." My brother-in-law finally erupted at their outrageous remarks. "So you're seriously abandoning Mom, not willing to care for her or even put her in a facility? Shane, you're being annoying. If you're so concerned, why don't you and Sarah take care of her? We don't need a senile old creature around," my sister-in-law spat out, her expression deeply exasperated. My husband, too, showed signs of frustration. Unable to stay silent any longer, I interjected, "Hold on, what's the meaning of this? She's your mother, and Gavin's and Shane's right. As if we cared just because she's our mom. Why do you assume we have to take care of her? Shane is her son too, so you and Shane can take care of her. Sarah, you don't have formal qualifications, but you've been caring for Mom almost every day, right? So looking after her should be a piece of cake for you, right?" With that, my sister-in-law smirked in the most disgusting way, and I no longer had the energy to argue. The situation was the same for my brother-in-law's family. We decided to bring this issue up with mother-in-law first. As we were leaving their home, my husband smirked unpleasantly, saying he wouldn't be coming home until this issue was settled. That they would so easily abandon their own mother, who had raised and loved them, left me in disbelief. For the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of dismay. Days later, a deep anger simmered within me as my brother-in-law's family, and I visited the hospital where mother-in-law lay admitted. Stepping into her hospital room, we were met with a faint smile on her lips, a feeble attempt to mask her pain. "Oh, Sarah and Shane, I'm sorry for being a bother," she murmured weakly. Each visit, she'd apologize, tugging at our hearts. "Mom, don't say such things. Look, we've brought your favorite grapes and pears. If there's anything else you'd like to eat, just tell us, and we'll get it for you," I reassured her, offering a semblance of comfort amidst the sterile hospital setting. While mother-in-law's spirits had improved, her condition remained precarious. As a side effect mentioned by the doctor, she had become paralyzed on her right side, rendering simple tasks like eating an arduous feat, necessitating assistance from the nurses. Confronted with her frailty, my brother-in-law's family and I shared a silent resolve. We knew we needed to confront my husband and sister-in-law, proposing the idea of living together to care for her. "I can't believe Olivia and Gavin would do such a thing to me," mother-in-law sighed, her voice tinged with sadness. In that moment, a pang of realization struck me. She must have sensed deep down that returning home might no longer be an option. Despite it being her own house, my sister-in-law and her husband resided there. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Knowing their disposition, They'd likely treat mother-in-law like a nuisance, a burden to be managed. As frustration clouded my thoughts, I couldn't shake the looming dread of my husband and sister-in-law's return, likely coercing my mother-in-law into some sort of care facility. But amidst my turmoil, mother-in-law surprised us all with an unexpected request. "Sarah, could you please fetch the banking card from the drawer of that desk over there?" With a solemn expression, she pointed to the drawer adjacent to her hospital bed. Inside lay valuable items, including the banking card I had previously brought her from her home during a hospital visit. Perplexed by her request, I retrieved the card nonetheless. With a sense of urgency, she opened it before us, revealing its contents to my brother-in-law, his wife, and me. "I've got savings here. Could you and Shane make use of it?" Her words left us stunned. The balance displayed on the card surpassed anything we had ever seen. In that moment, I resolved to confront my husband and sister-in-law with something unexpected. A few days later, my brother-in-law and I summoned our spouses for a crucial meeting at mother-in-law's hospital. Their disdain was evident upon hearing the venue, but curiosity piqued when we mentioned that mother-in-law had important matters to discuss regarding her future. They likely assumed she had decided to relinquish the house and, of course, the money. The next day, they arrived at mother-in-law's hospital room, greeted by a gathering of myself, our children, brother-in-law, and his family. Their expressions soared as they questioned our presence. "Why are all of you here?" "Mom, we just want clarification. What exactly do you plan to do?" As questions lingered in the air, mother-in-law's face remained solemn, her response forthcoming. "I have asked Sarah and Shane to gather you all here because I have crucial matters to discuss about our future," mother-in-law began. Tone firm yet somber, my husband and sister-in-law exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to expect. Taking a deep breath, mother-in-law continued, "As per your wishes, I will move out once I am discharged. I will no longer show up in front of you or interfere with your lives ever again." The gravity of her words hung heavy in the air as my husband and sister-in-law stared at her, their expressions akin to deer caught in headlights. "Sarah and Shane have filled me in on everything," mother-in-law continued, addressing their discomfort head-on. "The conversation you had about me in my house, the way you called me a terrible burden and planned to cast me out. I know it all." Before my husband and sister-in-law could respond, mother-in-law silenced them with a stern gaze. "Hold on, the conversation isn't over yet," she admonished, redirecting their attention back to her. "In exchange for my departure and our final goodbye, I'm asking both of you to leave the house as well," mother-in-law declared firmly. "Naturally, I will be cutting ties and excluding you from any inheritance." The shock on my husband and sister-in-law's faces was palpable. "From now on, I will be in Sarah's care. As I mentioned before, would 1 million suffice to make the house accessible and purchase a new car?" mother-in-law inquired, her gaze unwavering. Upon her insistence, I retrieved the banking card tucked away in my pocket and presented it to my husband and sister-in-law. Their disbelief was evident as they stared at the balance displayed on the card. 1 million? How? What's happening? It's impossible, my husband stammered, confusion etched on his face. It's your father's legacy money. He'd been saving all this time, mother-in-law explained calmly, revealing a truth that had been kept hidden from them. Their speechlessness mirrored our own from days before. As mother-in-law concluded her revelation, the weight of the truth settled over us all. I was planning to split this money between you two, but after understanding your true feelings, I've changed my mind, Olivia Gavin. You are no longer my children. I want you to leave this house. My mother-in-law's voice cut through the air, her tone cold and final. My husband and sister-in-law were jolted back to reality by her abrupt dismissal. What? What are you saying? Gavin and I are your legitimate children too, my sister-in-law protested, disbelief etched on her face. The only child I have is Shane. Plus, I have kind daughters-in-law Maya and Sarah. You don't know them. Start packing your belongings now, sever your ties with Shane and Sarah, and leave. Mother-in-law's words were uncompromising, leaving no room for argument. Having only ever known my mother-in-law's gentle demeanor, I was astounded to hear such harsh words from her. Her eyes bore a fierce, determined look, one that brooked no objections from my husband or sister-in-law. Though stunned into silence, I quickly collected myself, pulling out the idea card and placing it next to the bank card. Here's the thing, Gavin. I'm taking this to City Hall right after I declare what you are. Are you serious? My husband's eyes widened in shock at the sight of the divorce application I brandished. This goes to show how much you must despise me, right? Don't worry about Autumn and Kate. I'll take care of them. You just go live your life the way you want to, I declared, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. The revelation sent my husband into a fit of trembling, erupting in a loud outburst. His sister joined in, yelling and lunging at my mother-in-law. Thankfully, my brother-in-law and his wife managed to restrain them, explaining the situation to the nurses who rushed over. Security was soon called, and my husband and sister-in-law were escorted out of the building, their protests echoing through the halls. With the help of a lawyer arranged by my mother-in-law, I initiated divorce proceedings. In the end, I not only received a financial settlement but also custody of our daughters. My mother-in-law's last will and testament ensured her estranged son and daughter wouldn't inherit a thing. The family home was sold, and my ex-husband and his sister were forced to move into a shabby apartment, their constant bickering annoying their landlord and neighbors. Meanwhile, I welcomed my mother-in-law into our home after her discharge from the hospital. Together with my kids, we took care of her, maintaining a peaceful and mutually supportive relationship. Despite the challenges, we found solace in our day-to-day lives, navigating them together in harmony. Hi, I'm Ava, and I'm 34 years old. I live with my husband, James. We both work for the company his dad started. James' dad made the company huge, worth $250 billion a year. He even bought other construction companies. People respect him for being smart in business, even though he could be tough. James is supposed to take over, but he's not tough like his dad. He's kind, but sometimes too unsure. I worry he can't handle being a husband or a CEO. James has said, "I don't think I'm CEO material. If I end up as one, I'll likely just be a face for the company. It's simpler that way," indicating he's not really interested in running things. We've been married for 5 years, and I'm starting to get annoyed by his lack of drive. Unlike James, I'm pretty good at making decisions. Back when my father-in-law was running things, he trusted me with different jobs because of this. Before I married James, I worked at a bank, so I know how to handle money and keep track of numbers. After getting married, I decided to stop working and focus on taking care of our home. But my father-in-law asked me to join the construction company instead. Soon after I started, he started asking me to come to board meetings and share my thoughts on how to manage things. At first, the board members weren't sure about having the founder's daughter-in-law in important meetings. But as I kept giving useful ideas, they started to listen to me. James was also on the board, but he hardly ever came to meetings, and everyone thought that was okay, even my father-in-law. One day, when I got home from a meeting, I found James just sitting there watching TV like nothing was wrong. "Why did you come to the meeting today?" I asked, annoyed. "You're an important part of it. You should take it seriously." But he just shrugged and said, "Even if I went, I wouldn't understand what's going on. Plus, the board members seem to like you better, so it's not a big deal, right?" I couldn't help but wonder if he was bothered by me being involved in the meetings. Despite his comments, my father-in-law had been showing me the ropes of running the business and seemed to be grooming me for a bigger role. I started to enjoy being part of the management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to live up to my father-in-law's expectations. After about 2 years of attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. When important decisions needed to be made, the board members would come to me for advice, leaving James out of the loop. I had hoped this would motivate James to step up, but instead he became even more distant from his work. He'd show up at the office in the morning but disappear by noon, spending the rest of the day at home. When he came home, he avoided talking about work altogether, seeming like he didn't care about what was happening in the company. Meanwhile, my workload kept growing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law retired, the board members started depending on me more and more, giving me tasks that felt like what a CEO would do. Since we're a big company with lots of employees, I was focused on increasing sales and profits to benefit everyone who worked with us. Thanks to the hard work of our employees, our sales started going up. I found running the company more and more interesting and got really into my work. But on the flip side, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his job, and he started showing up at the company less often. Our conversations at home became less frequent, and our relationship started feeling strained. And around that time, I bumped into your sister Megan, and we grabbed lunch together. James came home and casually mentioned, "My sister Megan is a bit older than me and had just gone through a divorce about 6 months ago. It happened because she cheated, which caused a big scene when her angry husband showed up at our parents' house. So when Megan's husband got really upset, James went over to my parents' place to calm him down since I was busy with work." James, who had a gentle upbringing and a calming personality, was able to talk Megan's husband down and convince him to leave for a while. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is amazing. He handled my angry husband so well," she praised him. Megan's husband must have been impressed by James's calm and easygoing attitude. Megan ended up divorcing her husband and paying alimony. But after that incident, she seemed to see James in a different light. Before, she might have just thought of James as a rich, pampered guy who wasn't particularly attractive and a bit indecisive. But now, she seemed to view him as a respectable businessman. Now that Megan was single after her divorce, she probably saw James as a great catch, as she always liked wealthy men. But I was too focused on work to even think about such things. My sister wouldn't have known that James doesn't actually run the company. He's just a figurehead. Megan's ex-husband was a top employee at a foreign company and used to boast to me at their wedding, saying, "My husband is a great worker with a big salary and he's good-looking too." "You're probably jealous," he teased. He was handsome, smart, and had a cool style. I couldn't understand why Megan would cheat on such an amazing husband. 3 months after James mentioned having lunch with Megan, I came home to find him looking unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said, which surprised me because he'd never been so serious before. I felt nervous as I waited for him to continue. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce," he dropped the bombshell. I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more stunned to hear about Megan's pregnancy. Speechless, I listened as James said, "Megan plans to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you." I was stunned and asked him, "So you want to marry my sister?" James looked troubled as he replied, "It's not that I want to marry her, but as she's carrying my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James's usual indecisiveness and said, "Well, as she's having your baby, I guess we have to deal with it. Let's talk more when she comes over." It seemed like James and I couldn't make decisions together, so I decided to talk directly with my sister to sort things out. Even though I had already decided in my heart that I wanted a divorce, I felt I needed to talk to my father-in-law about the situation with the company. Being involved in running the business as the founder's daughter-in-law, I knew that divorcing would change my role. So the next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law everything my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was there too, was happy about the news of her son having a child. But she quieted down under my father-in-law's stern gaze. She seemed more focused on the grandchild than the company's affairs. After thinking it over, my father-in-law smiled and said, "Ava, I want you to keep working in the company just like you have been. James doesn't matter to me. I'll handle it, so let him do what he wants." It was clear that my father-in-law valued the company's management more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired, he still had a lot of influence as the founder, and he owned most of the company's shares. No executives would go against his wishes. I was starting to enjoy my work more, and I was hesitant to give it up now that I had settled into the role. It was time to talk about the future with my sister. On my day off, she came to my house with a big smile and said, "Ava, it's a shame you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you a lot of money for consolation. Please leave this house as soon as you can," she said triumphantly. My husband sat there silently, not saying a word, even though he was the one who caused all the trouble. I was shocked by his indifferent expression and said, "It's fine if we get divorced, but we also need to figure out alimony and divide our assets properly. Let's get a lawyer involved and sort it out." "I never imagined you, my own sister, would fall for someone like James," I said to my sister sarcastically. She gave me a stern look for a moment, but then composed herself. I realized she was trying to say that it's what's on the inside that matters, not looks or wealth. It was amusing to hear her talk as if she knew my husband's true self completely, and I struggled to hold back my laughter as I replied, "That's wonderful. I hope you two have a happy life together from now on." I couldn't help but wonder if by inner self, my sister meant money. She seemed to think my husband was the big shot at my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him directly. After our discussion, my sister announced that she would move in and arrange for a moving company. Knowing my sister's temper, I only took the essentials with me, having already secured a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and prepared documents for property division and alimony claims. The next day, after moving out, I began negotiations for alimony and property with my husband and sister, with my lawyer by my side. My husband remained indifferent, while my sister did all the talking. I'm willing to pay whatever alimony you ask for, so take your time to decide, my sister said. Upon hearing this, my lawyer decided to pursue alimony from my sister as well, not just my husband. My sister was already paying alimony to her ex-husband in installments, so my lawyer had warned that it might be difficult to claim alimony from her. Since my sister offered to pay whatever amount I wanted, I decided to go ahead and make a claim. During the property division negotiations, my sister eagerly pointed out, "This mansion belongs to James's family, so it shouldn't be included in the property division, right?" The lawyer replied calmly, "This building and the land are owned by the company, so it's up to the company to decide." It appeared that even my husband had assumed this house belonged to his father. "Oh really? I thought this was Dad's," he casually remarked. In contrast, my sister seemed surprised and turned to the lawyer, demanding, "Wait, does that mean I can't live here?" The lawyer replied professionally, "Since it's company property, you can continue living here if the company permits it." My sister seemed relieved at this and said, "Oh, you should have mentioned that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here," my sister confidently stated, causing the lawyer to be momentarily surprised before bursting into laughter. "What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James," the lawyer clarified, looking at my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband. It didn't even know this basic fact made me chuckle. My sister immediately turned to my husband and exclaimed, "Wait, James, you're not the president." Seeing my husband's troubled expression, I stepped in and explained to my sister, "James is just an advisor without any executive authority. I'm the executive director and also the president. Our father-in-law, the founder, used to be the president, but he appointed me as executive director and then president when he retired. The other executives supported my performance and there was no opposition." Meanwhile, my husband, due to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without any executive power, which was more of a disappointment than a true position of authority. Even though he was technically receiving an executive salary, since he wasn't actively working, it was even less than what a regular employee would earn. Therefore, I was the one covering all our living expenses. My husband, who had little interest in our household finances, didn't even bother to check whether the house we lived in was owned by the company or by his father. Despite being company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. Although I considered it a standard rental arrangement, the lawyer, still chuckling, asked, "Can we continue to charge James rent for this house?" My sister reacted strongly to the idea of rent, saying, "Rent? Why should James pay rent? Isn't it the company's property? Let's just let him stay for free." The lawyer then presented the rent amount, which caused both my sister and her husband James to be taken aback. "I guess rent for a house this size would be high. I can't afford that with my salary," he admitted. His executive compensation barely left him with any extra money, and paying that rent would make covering their living expenses even more challenging. Over their 5-year marriage, James had depleted his modest executive compensation entirely. My own salary had been swallowed up by the exorbitant rent and living expenses, leaving us with little in terms of assets. Splitting what little savings we had was the only option for dividing our assets. After the lawyer departed, my sister, now aware that the grand mansion she had envisioned was merely rented, looked utterly crestfallen, staring into space. James, as usual, wore his trademark grin. I suggested, "Why don't we leave this place and move back in with your parents? Your mother was thrilled about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of having to consider the opinion of a man who was soon to be my ex-husband. While I pondered whether this unreliable man was capable of raising a child, I ultimately decided it wasn't my concern. Turning to my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, I asked, "Are you all right with the alimony arrangement, sis? You seemed so confident earlier, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was taken aback, her expression snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay too?" She seemed shocked, apparently having missed the earlier discussion entirely. You said you provide plenty of alimony, but you didn't expect me to pay as well, did you? My salary is quite low. James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, observing these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already gathered signatures on the divorce papers and alimony requests. Although it didn't affect me much, witnessing James and my sister in this state was rather pitiful. My ex-husband, now remarried to my sister, had moved back to his parents' house, just as I had predicted. However, it seemed that there were constant arguments between my sister and my in-laws. The root of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, hoping for an heir, was furious. My father-in-law, who had always harbored ill feelings towards my sister for stealing his son from me, hadn't even spoken to her. He covered the alimony for both James and me, and I received my share in full. However, witnessing this, my sister pleaded with him, "Dad, could you also pay my alimony?" His response was sharp. "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." Clearly enraged, failing to achieve any of her desired outcomes, my sister fled from my ex-husband's family home without a word and disappeared. She had essentially remarried her ex-husband just to shoulder the burden of alimony, which seemed incredibly foolish to me. My ex-husband appeared to entertain thoughts of reconciling with me, but his father sternly rebuked him, saying, "You're not even capable of taking care of yourself, let alone a family." Even if he begged, I wouldn't consider getting back together with him. His betrayal of my sister shattered any trust I had in him, and his indifferent demeanor only fueled my disgust. During our discussions, he was stripped of his executive position and now works as a temporary employee. Meanwhile, I've remained the CEO, which remains the central focus of my life. I have no intention of remarriage post-breakup. I've maintained a connection with my father-in-law, seeking his advice when necessary. For now, my priority is the company, which I view as a marriage dedicated to the well-being of my employees. My name's Karen. I'm 25 and work a regular job. My grandpa, who looked after me, passed away 6 months back. Today's the day when the lawyer will read out Grandpa's will. So I went to his house with my older sister Susan, who's my only family. Our folks died in a crash 20 years ago, so we grew up with our grandparents. Grandma died from being sick a while ago, and since then, Grandpa's health kept getting worse. Worried about him, I moved into an apartment nearby and visited him often. "Karen, you're not a kid anymore. It's weird to keep running back here," my grandpa used to say, though he'd chuckle anyway. Then, one day, when I came over like always, I found him in pain at the door. Panicked, I called for help, but he passed away suddenly. "Quit summing out. Make some tea at least," my sister's voice snapped me back. "Right, the lawyer's coming," I replied, heading to the kitchen. Glancing back, I saw Susan lounging lazily on the floor, yawning. Even from the kitchen, her perfume was overwhelming. "Same old Susan," I muttered, putting the kettle on. Susan never changed. She dyed her hair since she was a teenager, hung out with troublemakers, and never worked. Grandma and Grandpa always had to clean up her messes, and it seems she's still the same even as an adult. She's always bouncing from one part-time gig to another without any stability. I knew she'd been hitting up Grandpa for cash when I wasn't around. I could picture her finding it all too bothersome if it wasn't for the inheritance. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for being here today," my sister's formal tone announced the lawyer's arrival. Rushing, I filled the teapot with leaves and headed to the door. "Thanks for coming," I greeted him. I'd seen him at the funeral. His eyes were kind, like Grandpa's. His lawyer badge gleamed on his chest. After paying respects to Grandpa's portrait, he sipped the tea I served and then pulled out Grandpa's will. It was entrusted to him while Grandpa was alive. The will stated, my sister Susan would get $20 million in cash, and I would inherit the house and land. My sister burst into laughter upon hearing the will. $20 million for the older sis and just an old house for you? How funny. Fits someone as dull as you, she mocked. It's not just the house. There's also the land, I shot back, but she only laughed sarcastically. Psh, this land in the middle of nowhere isn't worth much. I'd have preferred cash. Guess Grandpa favored me after all. I have to admit, it's a bit surprising. I guess Grandpa wanted me to take care of his cherished house and land, where he spent his life with Grandma, I said, reflecting on the will. A house and land? That's pretty cool, isn't it, Ryan? my boyfriend exclaimed, surprised by the news. I shook my head, silently conveying, "It's not all that great, really. My sister got 20 million in cash. That's more impressive." Saying it aloud felt empty, even though I was just being honest. "Wow, she's got looks and money now. She's on a winning streak," Brian remarked, unaware of how insensitive his comment sounded. Catching my glance, he quickly added, "But your happiness means more to me than any money, Karen. Brian and I have been together since I started working. We met at a party, and being the same age, we hit it off. I've introduced him to my grandpa and my sister. Though he hasn't popped the question yet, I've been thinking about marriage. Today, on our first outdoor date, I ended up sharing the news of my inheritance with Brian. I guess I did it because I envisioned him as my future husband. Little did I know I would regret it later. A few days later, I went to the family home I inherited from my grandfather. I planned to tidy up and organize his belongings. The property was spacious, but the house was simple. I thought I could handle it alone as I looked around and contemplated. It's close to my job. Maybe I should move in here. Living peacefully with a cat doesn't sound too bad. No rent to worry about, and any upkeep expenses should be manageable since I've been saving up. Maybe someday with Brian. Blushing at the thought, I shook my head to clear it. Ready to get started on cleaning, I rolled up my sleeves, but then my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on my phone screen. "Hey Karen, having a blast all alone in that old house?" My sister sounded tipsy, elongating her words in her usual manner. But today it was worse than usual. "Looks like you're hitting the bottle, huh?" "It's still daytime," I remarked with a sigh, to which she let out an exaggerated sigh in return. "Oh, you're such a goody two-shoes." I was right, she was definitely drinking. "I was thinking about moving in here eventually," I replied, hoping to wrap up the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm lounging in a fancy hotel suite right now," my sister exclaimed in an overly dramatic tone. "Guest is keeping me company?" "I have no clue." "Boring. That attitude won't win Brian over," she teased. "What?" "Sorry, Karen." Brian's voice suddenly chimed in, catching me off guard. Confusion swirled in my mind, but I pushed away any unsettling thoughts. My imagination was playing tricks on me again, conjuring up absurd scenarios. "Shocked, huh?" My sister's spiteful voice cut through. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch," she bragged, recounting how she'd been drawn to Brian since I introduced them, how she found out where he worked because of me, and how she'd approached him as soon as he finished work. He had eagerly gone along with her, telling her she was far more attractive than me. I listened in disbelief, unable to find words. "Karen, I'm so sorry." Brian's voice came next. "Please tell me this is a mistake." I tried to speak, but he continued. "As a guy, I couldn't pass up the chance. I do feel guilty, but come on, who can resist a beautiful woman with $20 million, right?" His words, asking for understanding, left me feeling drained of emotion. A chill washed over me, as if all warmth had been sucked away. "You know what? I don't meet a man like you," I declared. My sister's laughter echoed loudly in the background. The voice on the phone reverted to hers. "Well, that's the way it goes. Let's not pretend to be sisters anymore, okay? I don't want you running to me just because you're broke." With those cutting words, she hung up. Overwhelmed by delayed emotions, all I could do was cry out. It's been 5 years since then. A cat was curled up on my lap, peacefully dozing in front of my laptop. It purred contentedly in its sleep. Today was my day off, but I still had some work to finish up at home. "Oh no, this won't help get the work done," I thought guiltily as I gently moved the cat aside. Just as I reached for my phone, it began to ring. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered without hesitation. "Hey Karen, it's been ages." The voice on the other end greeted me, instantly recognizable as my sister's. I froze at the sound of her familiar tone. "It's me, Karen. I can tell by the way you say hello. After all, I'm your big sister." 5 years had passed, making Susan 34 now. I couldn't help but smirk at her unchanged manner of speaking. "You're still the same. By the way, I came home, and there's a hotel in its place. Did you sell the house?" "That's none of your business." "Ah, come on. It's a pretty fancy hotel, right? You must have made a good amount of cash." Growing irritated, I was about to hang up when she launched into chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she'd blown through the inheritance in just 2 years and now found herself in significant debt. Even Brian, who she was still with, seemed to be struggling financially. I was left speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. "Sorry, but that's not happening," I replied calmly, despite Susan's yelling. I had always questioned why Grandpa had divided his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I finally understood. I began to speak slowly. 5 years ago, when Brian ended things, I was devastated. After sobbing my heart out, I sat numbly in my room, lost in thought. "I'm such a fool," I whispered, tears streaming down my face once more. My gaze fell on a painting I had crafted as a child and given to my grandfather. He had cherished it, framing it and displaying it with pride. With shaky hands, I retrieved the painting. "Grandpa," as waves of nostalgia and loneliness washed over me, tears blurring my vision, I noticed something fall from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I realized it was a fresh sheet of notepaper addressed to me. I remembered how, as a child, I used to stick notes on the back of that frame, exchanging secret messages with my grandfather. It was like our family journal. Knowing I would inherit the house, he must have assumed I would find this note. I was grateful I noticed it. The thought of leaving it unnoticed sent shivers down my spine. "To Karen," the letter began, dated just before my grandfather's passing. "I knew you'd find this letter eventually. You're probably wondering why I divided my estate this way, giving cash to your sister and leaving you the old house and land. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not true. Despite appearances, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me until the end." Finally, everything clicked into place. Despite Susan's words, Grandpa valued me more, huh? I'm sure Susan's cruel remarks hurt deeply at the time. Despite my greater love for Grandpa, a pang of jealousy, I continued reading the letter. But Susan wouldn't be satisfied with a fair split. This girl, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Just like her grandpa. She even stole my boyfriend. That's why I want to tell him deep down. I thought to myself, that's why I set things up this way. At first glance, Susan may seem to have gotten the better deal, but she won't pay much attention to your share. According to Grandpa's letter, the value of this land in our area keeps increasing due to ongoing urban development. It may not be worth Susan's $20 million yet, but its value will surely rise in the future. As I read further, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy. After conveying the letter's content, Susan clicked her tongue and muttered, "Old hag." I did live in that house for a while, but when I got married, I decided to sell it, just like Grandpa's letter suggested. The land value had risen enough by then. "I'm not lending you any money," Susan said, sounding frustrated. Then, as if struck by an idea, she added, "Hey, how about this? I'll give Brian back to you. Help out your sister. It's a good deal, right?" In that moment, something inside me snapped. Enough is enough. Grandpa took care of you, and yet you've shown no gratitude. I'm disgusted by that. You're not my sister anymore, and I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good, I declared before hanging up. I quickly blocked her number, and my cat, sensing the tension, retreated to the bed. I scooped up my cat and whispered, "I'm sorry." Soon after, Susan and Brian barged into our old house. Were they trying to return Brian to me? They seemed to have misunderstood something, yelling about being my family, even though I had already sold the land and had no ties to it anymore. It's pretty straightforward for those two. I sold the land, and an inn was built on it. Therefore, I must be the owner of the inn. Naturally, the staff reported them to the police. They were arrested for damaging several items in the inn. Additionally, it was uncovered that they had engaged in marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I quickly proved that I had no involvement. Since we were estranged, I was released. As my husband and I were leaving the station, we heard shouting and turned to look. There were Susan and Brian, looking completely different. Thankfully, they didn't notice us. Both of them had disheveled hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the people I remembered. Especially Susan, who never went without makeup and stylish attire, looked drastically different. They were likely being transferred to another location. As I watched them, a wave of melancholy washed over me. My husband and I exchanged a glance, and he offered his hand. I took it, and together we left the police station. Are you all right? My husband's eyes were full of concern as he looked at me. I'm okay. I have you and our little one, I said, placing my hand on my slightly swollen belly and returning his smile. There's a new member of our family growing inside me. Money is important, but there's something even more precious. That's what I want to instill in our child with you by my side. My name's Anne. I got married 6 months ago when I was 26. My husband John is 30 and works in an office. So this story is about when John decided without asking me to let his younger sister, Molly, stay with us in our new house. We spent $45,000 on this house for just the two of us. We've been planning the house and furniture since we got engaged. When John's stuff arrived, there was so much of it. I was surprised and asked if it would all fit in his space. Then John casually dropped the bomb that Molly was moving in too. I was shocked. Why? I asked. We just got married. But John didn't see the problem. He said Molly's family too, so it's fine. She said she wanted to live in the new house. I objected without any discussion, but John just kept unpacking, ignoring me. Then he suddenly got angry, yelling, "If you don't like it, you can leave. I've already decided Molly's staying, so stop complaining." I wasn't convinced and threatened to call my brother. Scared of my brother's reaction, John changed his mind quickly. "Wait, don't call him. Molly won't stay long. She just needs a place until she finds a job and a house. Can you understand?" I reluctantly agreed. Then I suggested, "Can Molly stay in the guest room?" John hesitated and said, Yeah," though he didn't seem sure. I moved Molly's things into the guest room. After a busy day of unpacking, we were almost done. We were having a toast to celebrate when the doorbell rang. It was late, so I wanted to ignore it, but John answered it quickly. I was surprised because I was ready for bed. John called me, "And Molly's here." Irritated, I came back to the living room. "Welcome, Molly. Why are you here so late?" I asked, trying to hide my annoyance. Molly replied, "Can't I come whenever I want?" "Now show me my room, big bro," she said, and John led her to the guest room. Soon Molly complained, "This isn't it." John said, "It's a bigger room, isn't that better?" She searched for another room, saying, "Upstairs, right? This is my room, big bro." I felt uneasy, and when I went upstairs, Molly was claiming my workroom as hers. I couldn't help but raise my voice. "This is my workroom, so it can't be your room," I insisted. John suggested, "Why not? Let's make this Molly's room," but I kept saying no. Then I pointed to the room next to it, intended to be John's hobby room, but he panicked. "Not that room. I've been looking forward to using it. I chose the wallpaper and everything." "No way," I replied. The only option left was the featured children's room, currently a guest room. Molly, still unhappy, snapped, "And you're quite insolent, aren't you? Not listening to the head of the household. Quite cheeky for a freeloader who depends on him for meals." I was too tired to argue back, thinking, who's the real freeloader here? As I headed back to the living room, I heard Molly asking, "Hey, big bro, do we have anything to eat?" "I'm hungry." I ignored her and continued celebrating alone in the living room. They were arguing, but I didn't pay much attention until John came over and accused me, saying, "You're always going against me and acting all high and mighty." He grabbed the wine bottle and drank it all, shouting, "If you won't listen to me, then leave. I'm the head of this household, don't underestimate me." Then he left with Molly. Despite the late hour, I decided to call my brother and tell him about Molly. He answered right away, sounding angry. I asked if he was mad and interrupted him during an argument with his wife. He'd apologized, but it seemed their relationship was in trouble. Worried, I offered to come over, but he wanted to be alone. I told him about Molly moving in and the issues with John and her. He was concerned about how I was being treated, but I brushed it off, saying I wouldn't be anyone's servant. We then talked about his problems with his wife, and I was shocked to learn she was having an affair with men from a dating site. He found out because she accidentally sent him a message meant for her lover. John had suspected her infidelity for a while, and once he got proof, he took her phone and sent her back to her parents' house. He plans to visit them tomorrow for a discussion. We ended the call acknowledging that both of us were in tough situations and agreed to catch up again soon. While I was finishing up unpacking, I waited for John and Molly to come back home. They returned late, happily tipsy. As I continued organizing, they approached me and Molly came up with an idea. Let's turn our bedroom into Molly's room. We can each sleep in our own workrooms. What do you think? It's a good idea, right? Just make sure Ollie's room is cleared out by tomorrow, she said. I wanted to clarify something and ask them, how much will Molly contribute to groceries and household supplies each month? And since she doesn't plan on staying forever, how long does she intend to stay? My husband started to panic at my questions. What? You want money from unemployed Molly? I'll cover it with my salary, so there's no issue, right? Molly chimed in. As for how long I'll stay, until I'm satisfied. My mom's cooking is too old-fashioned for me and I don't like. She's always nagging me to do laundry and cleaning at home. But here, I can do whatever I want without spending a dime. It's the best. If you don't like it, Anne, why don't we move out? I retorted, then let's split the household expenses. I'll work to cover my share. Feel free to use your salary for yourself and Molly, I told them. They seemed pleased with this, although I added, you'll need to take care of your own chores. They didn't seem to be listening, so I left a note to make it clear. The next day, I visited my brother's workplace because I was worried about him. He's the president of a construction company, taking over after our father passed away last year. When I got there, he was surprised to see me. He asked what's up, and I explained what happened the night before, asking if he could hire me at his company. He agreed, saying our secretary is leaving due to her husband's relocation. Then he told me about his situation. I was shocked to hear that his wife was pregnant, but it was clear the child wasn't his. The messages on the phone John had taken from his child revealed conversations, photos, and videos with her lover. They showed that the man was trying to avoid responsibility after learning about the pregnancy. When I asked my brother if he planned to divorce his wife, he said, it's tough on the kids, but divorce seems like the only solution. So I recommended involving a lawyer for a proper discussion, then I went home. In my room, I couldn't stop thinking about the texts and pictures my brother showed me of his wife's affair. It was hard to shake them off. The sister-in-law I knew was loving and family-oriented, and I admired her for it. But she had betrayed my brother. It felt like losing a close friend, and tears filled my eyes. Despite this, Molly kept knocking on my door, asking for food, but I was too overwhelmed to argue, so I left her be. Then my husband called, even though he should have been at work. I didn't pick up because I knew what he wanted to discuss, and I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. Shortly after, I received a text from my brother, asking if I could go with him to see a lawyer the next day. I sent back an OK sticker. I must have dozed off. My husband's yelling woke me up. You didn't even make food for Molly, and you're sleeping? What's up with that? He shouted. I silently handed him a note and pointed to it for him to read. He then said to Molly, let's let her rest today. She seems off. We can talk to her tomorrow once she's feeling better. I'm not sick. I'm just tired of you guys arguing, I mumbled before falling back asleep. The next morning, without waking my husband, I went to my brother's place. He hadn't slept at all, and his eyes were red. I made breakfast for the kids and drove them to kindergarten. They mentioned, Mommy and Daddy fought and Mommy left. Mommy was the bad one. She left us alone at home, and we cried. Daddy got mad. They seemed to think it might be better without their mom since she got angry easily. I reassured them, if you feel lonely, call Auntie, okay? They cheered up, saying they might get lonely today. They didn't seem too sad about their mom not being there. After dropping the kids off, I went to the lawyer's office with my brother. The lawyer informed us that there was substantial evidence from pictures, videos, messages, and recorded conversations on my sister-in-law's phone. My brother's main aim was to divorce while retaining parental rights. After he shared his story, I got some advice about my own situation with my husband before my brother dropped me off at home. He was planning to gather the family and break the news about the divorce. If anything happens, don't hesitate to call. We'll all be there for you, he said somewhat ominously before leaving. When I walked into the living room, the house was a mess. It seemed like they had attempted to make breakfast, with greasy surfaces in the kitchen and dishes left on the table. I sighed at the sight. As I debated whether to clean up, Molly appeared. Where did you go without making breakfast? John didn't eat anything and left for work. Isn't it your duty as a wife to take care of household chores? She accused me. I retorted, I'm not your maid. Weren't you taught to clean up after yourself since you were a child? Ignoring her insistence that you're the wife, I walked away and headed to my room. When I returned to my room, I found that Molly's belongings had taken over. Confused, I asked her, "Did you go into my room? Your stuff is in there. What's going on?" She replied, "I've always loved your room. It suits my neat and cute style perfectly, don't you think? I moved your things into the guest room." Furious, I hurried to the guest room. My computer and belongings were scattered haphazardly. I felt a surge of anger. It was too much to bear. I felt an intense desire for revenge. I'll never forgive her, I vowed. I decided to wait for my husband John to come home, show him the mess, and ask, "Do you still want to live here with Molly?" I prepared myself for any possible outcome. John arrived home earlier than usual, seemingly after a call from Molly. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching the guest room. As I watched him head straight for the guest room, I was sure he already knew about Molly taking over my room and wouldn't support me. When he opened the door and entered looking furious, Molly was right beside him, wearing a smug smile. "You went against Molly. You're the one at fault here, neglecting to make breakfast. Aren't you my wife? Shouldn't you take care of me? Molly is your sister-in-law. You should look after her and tolerate her." I thought bitterly, so this was how it was going to be. In that moment, any love I had for my husband vanished. He didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge Molly's wrongdoing, or suggest she leave or help with chores, or give me my room back. I told him, "If you're letting Molly stay, I'll invite my brother over. He's never seen our house. Maybe I should call him now." Despite his usual fear of my brother around Molly, John acted boldly. "Are you sure about that? If you bring him here, I'll kick you out," he threatened confidently. I stood my ground. "Go ahead, try to kick me out. I'll call my mother, brother, and his wife, and let them see the house," I declared. Expecting me to beg or cry at his threat, John snapped back, "Don't you dare call your family. If you're not happy, then leave." Molly joined in, asserting, "This is our home with John. You have no right to bring anyone here. Even if they come, we'll just show them the door." Ignoring their warnings, I grabbed my phone and stated, "I'm calling my brother." Turning to John and Molly, I suggested, "Maybe it's best if we all live separately. We can have our own space and enjoy ourselves without any worries." Molly seemed thrilled at the idea of me leaving, with John agreeing. "That does sound like fun. Perhaps it's time for a divorce." Frustrated, I decided to call my family over. Despite John and Molly's excitement about me leaving, I warned, "You'll regret this decision. I'm calling my family now." I dialed my brother and urged my family to come over as soon as possible. My brother's response was swift and reassuring. "We've been expecting your call. We're already on our way." His foresight touched me deeply. Within about 30 minutes, my family arrived. Molly, who had threatened to kick them out earlier, turned pale at the sight of my brother. "Molly, I thought you were going to show my family the door," I remarked. She could only shake her head in response. Seeing her and John's fear after facing my imposing brother was quite satisfying. Both my brothers have been practicing judo since childhood, and their presence is quite intimidating. Standing over 6 feet tall with a buzz cut, my elder brother used to compete nationally until a knee injury in college. Now, he coaches at a local boys' club. My younger brother is just as formidable, also practicing judo and resembling his older sibling closely. Despite being quite memorable, Molly seemed to have forgotten encountering them at the wedding. "We're getting kicked out by who? Aren't you the ones leaving?" My elder brother laughed, prompting Molly to gather her courage and demand, "My brother is divorcing his useless wife now. Please leave." In response, my younger brother retorted, "You're the ones leaving, right? This is Anne's house, built with her share of our father's inheritance and in her name." Meanwhile, my mother busied herself in the kitchen, tidying up and commenting, "What a mess." She then called out, "Let's not waste time. Get to the point." So my brothers complied, turning to me and instructing, "Another person is coming. Let them in when they arrive," before gesturing for John and Molly to sit down. "We have 2 matters to discuss today. First, we need you to leave," my elder brother told them. When Molly asked if the house belonged to me, John hesitated, saying I was involved in the interior design discussions with the contractors, so I thought it was mine, but maybe not. "But I'm the head of the household, right?" John protested, seemingly under the impression that he owned the house by virtue of being the head of the household, without considering its source of funding. Being the head of the household and being the owner of the house are two different things, someone pointed out, leaving John speechless. However, Molly remained defiant, citing residency rights. "I won't leave. I have the right to stay," she declared, glaring at me. "Residency rights don't apply here since you're not paying rent," someone countered, leading John to resist further. "But I'm married to Anne. I can't leave. We can't separate," he insisted. At that moment, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the guests my brothers had mentioned. When I opened the door, my sister-in-law, my elder brother's wife, stood there in tears. Before letting her in, I asked my brother how we should handle their presence. My mother offered to take care of their child upstairs. After settling my mother and welcoming my sister-in-law inside, John was shocked to see her. "How did you find out where we live?" he stammered, acting suspiciously. My elder brother intervened, reminding John of their second matter to discuss. John's face drained of color. "What? She's..." It seemed he was unaware of her identity as my brother's wife. Realizing his mistake, he attempted to flee but was frozen in place. "Seems like my wife is pregnant with your child. Did you two plan this?" my brother accused, slamming evidence of the affair onto the table. "Well, what's your next move?" "For me, it's divorce, nothing less," he declared. Fearing the consequences, Molly attempted to retreat upstairs. My younger brother wasted no time in instructing Molly. "We've got a truck loaded with boxes. Start packing your things right now." He then left to fetch the boxes himself. Molly, taken aback, asked, "Am I leaving today?" Upon receiving a stern glare from my brother, she seemed to relent. Meanwhile, my elder brother turned to his wife, commanding, "My wife and John can sort this out first. Sign the divorce papers." He handed her the papers and a pen. Although she hesitated upon seeing that custody was assigned to him instead of her, he dismissed her concerns, stating, "That's what the kids want. Your opinion doesn't matter." With tears in her eyes, she signed the papers. Moved by the scene, I saw the tears welling up in my brother's eyes, realizing the emotional toll it had taken on him. Then it was my turn to decide. "Anne, what are you going to do?" my brother asked. Without hesitation, I declared, "I choose divorce too. I want him out of my house as soon as possible." My husband dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness. "Please, I don't want a divorce. It might not even be my child," he pleaded. However, when my brother revealed that he had undergone surgery to prevent further children, my husband was left speechless. My brother handed me blank divorce papers. "If you want him out right away, why don't you have him sign?" he suggested. Reluctantly, I instructed my husband to sign, which he did. I then presented him with 2 pledge documents prepared by my lawyer. One was for him and the other for Molly, pledging to pay for the damages they caused to the house, totaling roughly $30,000. Additionally, the documents stated that they were never to enter my house again in the future. John glanced at my brother and me, perhaps intending to voice a complaint, but a stern glare from my brother silenced him, and he reluctantly signed the pledge document. His shoulders slumped as he made a feeble attempt to head upstairs to gather his belongings for the move. However, my brother intervened, producing a marriage license. "I got this for you too," he announced, handing it to his wife. Without hesitation, she signed it and urged John to do the same. "You've made a mess of my life, and you can't escape responsibility," she declared with a determined look. John, overwhelmed and tearful, complied, muttering, "Just do whatever you want." Finally, my brother demanded, "You have nothing to say unless I ask, right? Don't you owe me an apology?" John, almost prostrating himself, apologized profusely to my brother. With that settled, we hurriedly packed John's and Molly's belongings into boxes and loaded them onto the awaiting truck, destined for their parents' house. And just like that, my brief married life came to an end. As I contemplated living alone in the now empty house, my mother offered to sell her own house and move in with my younger brother, while my elder brother planned to do the same with his 3 children. It seemed that we were all embarking on a new chapter, albeit in different configurations. My mother and brother have decided to purchase the house from me using the proceeds from selling their own homes. They keep suggesting, "Why not build a new house when we get married again?" But I insist, I'm content with an apartment. We fulfilled the kids' dream of owning a dog, bringing laughter and joy into our lives despite the lingering memories of this house. Meanwhile, My ex-husband reportedly remarried my former sister-in-law 6 months later and now resides with her at his parents' house. He's working tirelessly to pay for the damages to the house, while Molly is treating her new sister-in-law like a maid, causing her to lose her mental stability. Unable to bear seeing her daughter in such a state, Molly's mother kicked her out of the house. Seeking refuge, Molly turned to my ex-husband for help, only to be met with blame. He coldly remarked, "If you hadn't moved in, we'd still be living in that mansion." Left isolated and without support, Molly found herself